Dirty Moderates, you all know from listening to me on a regular basis, and I always thank you for listening to me, how I feel about the rule of law, our Constitution, the idea of America as an idea, the only nation founded on one. And crucial to that is this understanding that we have 10 amendments, or we have the first 10 amendments, which are known as the Bill of Rights. And we hear them bandied about a lot in our political discourse. We love the first, but we hate the second, or too many of us hate the second. Some of us love the fourth, and others of us think the 14th Amendment is invalid anyway. But certainly the Second Amendment, a bone of great contention for, I think, many people in politics today because of our gun epidemic, has proven to be radioactive, but also deadly and vital to our political makeup, but important in how we approach it. How activism happens, how change happens, and where it should happen. And often that happens behind the scenes. And our guest today is literally doing so much heavy lifting for this country behind the scenes. And in a country where our politics is all flash and dazzle, that may not seem exciting, but he is exciting. Matthew Littman joins me today. Matthew, before I let you jump in, Matthew was a speechwriter for Senator Joe Biden of Delaware. Which is awesome. He's got his own PR firm, and he is really, let's just say, making the twain that you never think will meet by bringing gun owners and gun reform advocates, gun control advocates together to try to do something and reconcile that with our constitutional Bill of Rights, our Second Amendment. Matthew, welcome to Dirty Moderate.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
So let's go back sort of to the beginning here. I feel like there's always a fatalistic, kind of pathetic way gun issues are covered, right? I mean, understandably, kids get shot in school and it's horrific, and the media thrives off that, of course. And not that they shouldn't be covering the tragedies, but boy, it becomes so grim, and the reportage becomes so hopeless.
Yeah.
But in truth, and I want you to talk about that, a lot of what you're doing is proving on a state-by-state basis, especially, to be very effective. Tell us why we should believe at the outset that we can make changes when it comes to gun violence.
Well, we are making changes when it comes to gun violence. And of course, we're not going to get, as your audience knows, smart people. We have a lot of deaths from guns on an annual basis, and we're not going to go from 45,000 of those to zero. The question is, what can we do and how can we make a difference? And we've seen that on a state level. We've seen that on a federal level with the legislation passed about a year ago.
Right.
None of these things will make all of the difference. Some of these things make a difference. And so our role, my role, even your role, Adam, is to keep pushing ahead here and to get to that point where we don't hear about these shootings all the time. School shootings where we're not frightened to send our kids to school, for example. That's what we work on a daily basis. And I think there's been some progress, but truthfully, Adam, not nearly the amount of progress we need to see.
Right. The organization is called 97%. Now, is that because we think, or you read that 97% of people want gun control? Is that, I didn't even look that up, but I'm assuming, right?
There was a poll from a few years ago, like 3 years ago, that said 97% of people favor gun reform. The funny part about it, Adam, is sometimes I'll be in a meeting, like let's say with a member of Congress, and they'll say, no, it's only, I saw polls, only 90% that favor gun reform. And I say, great, okay, you win. It's only 90%.
By the way, what issue has that level of critical mass, right?
What I point out to people is that cheeseburgers are only liked by 82%.
It's true. No, I mean, for politics in this country, for people to coalesce around an issue at 91%. Wow. I know. Sorry about that 6%, right?
Exactly.
Oh my God. So the organization, I want you to go in a little more detail about that also. You have a board that's made up of like people from obviously all sides of the aisle. Tell us a little bit about who's on the board, but how you gathered, seemingly disparate forces and put them together.
Well, I think it's important for folks to know when we started this, we were looking into it to see if there's any room for another organization. In other words, you've got great people who are working on gun safety. You've got the groups that your audience knows, like Everytown and Giffords and Brady. So what's the point of another organization? Is there one? It took us a year to figure out what we should do, if anything. And then what we found out from talking to smart people like Police Chief Bill Bratton, for example, was that gun owners are not represented at the table. In other words, those groups your audience knows, like the NRA, represent a small minority of how gun owners actually feel.
Of course.
What we do is we set out to prove, we do polling research, and we're able to bring that to members of Congress or states, as you were talking about before. But in terms of our advisory board, we try our best. It's not easy to be as bipartisan as humanly possible with the advisory board. So we have 2 former NRA lobbyists, for example, but they believe in background checks and red flag laws, which is why they're not current NRA lobbyists, I suppose. We have a bunch of former members of Congress. We have current members of Congress. We have athletes. But the idea is to show what you're saying, which is that there's this diverse group of people out there that favor these basic gun reforms. Not everything is agreed upon by the group, but there are certain things that are agreed upon, and that's where we come in.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about this. I think about it a lot. And then in prepping to speak to you today, we're a nation of gun owners, right? We're not, and I always tell my friends on the left this because I'm not on the left, I'm in the center, but I'd say I hold center-right positions with many other libertarian positions, well, got to get rid of guns. So, well, we're not confiscating guns in America. So we need to have a conversation, right? That is viable, that isn't filled with partisan bullshit, but also we have to get laws passed that aren't going to be emotional victories, but they're going to be pragmatic ones. And they're going, right? I mean, effective victories where people aren't like, well, wow, we did it. California got rid of everybody's gun. In other words, not that they did that, but I know your organization is trying to get into the meat of this or the heart of this matter by breaking down the number of things you can do. It's not a one size fits all thing in a nation of 320 million people with over 400 million guns. So let's talk about that. Like, since we're not confiscating guns, right? And I don't want to talk about that. And we do have a Second Amendment, and it matters because it's the Second Amendment. And yes, I think there's a well-regulated militia, but there's a right to bear arms. The conversation has to begin from, we can be a nation of guns. And we were for up until about, I always use Columbine. I know maybe that's not the right marker, but for the first, 220 years, we weren't a country of mass shootings. Right. I mean, and we've been a nation of gun owners. It's etched into our frontier ethos, our DNA. Right. So what say you about all these swirling, the way in which the debate tends to obfuscate more than elucidate?
I totally agree with you. People they do unfortunately talk about, let's get rid of all the guns. Well, obviously that is not happening. There are 400 million guns in the country.
Right.
So what are you going to do so that people are safer with the amount of guns that they have? Because we're not going to be confiscating guns. Right. And that it takes something to get some people to even acknowledge that part of it, Adam. That's sometimes not such an easy thing to do, but it's not reality. And the other thing is that you find, unfortunately, with a lot of elected officials, for example, is that they're focused on things that have no chance of passing. It's not just that they're not going to be effective, it's that they're not passing. Right. So you're working on something that will be neither effective nor is going to pass. Let's try to figure out what people will support that will be effective and pass. And so we work on, that's what really where we come in. And I do, I'm a Democrat, but as you know, because I was a speechwriter for Biden. Yeah. But I do come in and I say to some of these members of Congress, something that they're, when they're talking about something, I say, well, that's not passing. So here's something that can be effective that will save lives. Work on this instead of that. And what we get into, Adam, on both sides of the aisle very often is that guns are used as a messaging issue sometimes, not necessarily for what's going to work, but to message to your own supporters as to how you feel. And our focus is not that. Our focus is what can actually work, what can be effective. And so to my liberal friends, they'll get mad at some of the things that we say, even about gun storage. If I say, Adam, to some people that we work on gun storage and have a device, we invested in a company that it's a smart storage, smart safe. It looks like a holster. I can sometimes get silence because I'm saying to people that it's okay to own a gun. Well, you've said it all, Adam, which is that we have the Second Amendment in this country. How do we keep people safer? A way to keep people safer is to lock up your gun to choose to do that, right? So that's something that prevents stolen guns. But there are all these types of things. There are a bunch of them. The other thing, Adam, I would say is we don't go into a meeting with 85 items on the agenda.
Right.
We go to a meeting and we have 3 items on the agenda, and this is it. And you could choose to do it, or you could choose not to do it. But this will have the support of everybody.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That's what we tell people.
So is it, I mean, this I hear all the time, and I think I may have even heard it from you, but we hear about how the majority of gun owners, or about 80%, which is certainly well over the majority of gun owners, think that, universal background checks, which I think seems to be like a really good starting point for this conversation, support that. I certainly do. Just for the record, I am a big supporter of effective gun control. I'm not a gun nut by any way. I actually currently don't own a gun, but I will be owning a gun. So this interests me, but I'm not coming at you because I have 17 rifles in my cabinet or somewhere or locked up somewhere. One thing when I talk to gun owners that I think is kind of a nuance is I think when people hear that there will be strong federal laws, right? Obviously there's state by state gun cultures. If you live in Montana, I always say to my friends, and you're in the middle of nowhere and you're 30 minutes from a police department and there's bears or something, you have to understand why people have weapons. It's not. These are not school shooters. These are people who hunt, and I'm telling these people living in the middle of New York City. I said, yeah, but not everybody lives in New York City. I don't know why you don't know this, right? And not everybody lives in LA like we live. So, is there a state by state approach to background checks that we think might be at least as effective or more than a federal or universal system? I mean, because people get skeptical of not what government can do, but how government will muck it up.
Well, so the federal background check system, which is the one that we often talk about when we talk about universal background checks, even if it's implemented for all types of gun sales, is not a super effective system.
Okay, how come?
Because they don't have all the information that you really need to do an effective background check. Mm-hmm. Right. So, for example, we've done a lot of research on this with a person at Tufts University. If you do state gun background checks and state permitting, you're going to get a much more extensive background check. And what we say to people is if you do that, state permitting and state background checks, then a guy like you, Adam, if you bought a gun and this week, and then as you were saying about your 17 rifles, which I can't see the whole studio behind you, but I assume they're on the floor, the 17 rifles, you would not need to get a background check the next week for your next gun purchase. In other words, you've passed this extensive background check. That should be good for several years. You don't need to do that every time. But the difference is the state background check is more effective than the federal background check. There are, I think, only 2 states that do that right now, that state background check. And it's proven to be very effective. So it is supported by gun owners to do that as well. We favor it. You're also talking about this idea of a sort of, the federal government having information, all that. Just to be clear, that's a small 84% of gun owners favor background checks. 80% of gun owners favor a state permitting system. Mm-hmm. So it's that minority, but that minority is super loud and very effective at organizing and making themselves heard. And something else, Adam, that may be of interest to your audience is, the NRA isn't having its best day, right?
No.
They've been really knocked around over the last few years, but there are groups that are to the right of the NRA.
Who are they?
The Gun Owners of America, for example.
Oh, right.
They're an extremely effective lobbying group. They're not as big as the NRA, but they're very effective. So when I'm meeting with a House Republican, they'll say, we got 1,000 calls on that issue from the Gun Owners of America. And that stuff is important. So it's also important that people know, because the NRA is the big boogeyman, and I would dissuade people from that. Because it's not really about the NRA. What the NRA was great at, and maybe one day will be again, is messaging, right? A good guy with a gun could stop a bad guy with a gun. That's the NRA, right? But now there are other groups coming up that are doing something similar and even to the right. And they represent a minority. Our role is to represent the majority in these cases.
Right. I mean, it is true. I mean, this history, but it's worth revisiting with you about, by the time around the time of the mid to late 70s, the NRA said, I want to get in the game of politics. There's power in this. And they went from being hey, here's how you properly and safely use a gun, and we mail something to your house, and they have training courses, to being, a sort of fire breathing arm of the right, and tying these sort of abstract notions, broad notions of freedom and liberty to gun ownership and self-defense, and then turning that into a huge divisive issue. And their determination to prevent meaningful gun reform, correct me if I'm wrong, coincided with this proliferation of just guns in the country, to where there are more guns than people, and it became like the perfect storm, right? Where Congress is inactive and does nothing and does less and less. And certainly really ever since the assault weapons ban, and I want to talk to you about that, expired in 2004, it seems like we've just had very little, not the state level, but we've had very little federal activity. Is that right?
Absolutely. It's so right. I mean, that's absolutely right. The legislation that passed last year was the first legislation to pass in decades. But one thing, and it goes back to something you were talking about earlier, is we passed that legislation, no one's complaining, right? In other words, these things are so supported by the public that when the Republicans were looking at this last summer to do this legislation, they polled Republicans to see if they would support it, and they did. So that's why John Cornyn, for example, and Mitch McConnell were able to get on board. In Florida, as another example, you have red flag laws, right? You don't hear a lot of complaints. These are things that are almost universally supported by gun owners and non-gun owners. It's when you get down to things like the weapon itself that you start to get into areas where there's a separation.
Right. And let's remind us about the legislation that Congress got done last year.
So last year, Congress had hearings and then did some extensive legislation where, for example, they would provide money to states that would do red flag laws,
right?
This domestic violence loophole, a couple of different things. They provided community grants. And so all of that stuff is pretty well in popular support. So you don't see, like, when we talk about what to do in the future, that stuff's already done. Right? We're past it. Right. What are we going to do, if anything? Are we going to be able to do anything after that?
Right. But so you have universal background checks or state level background checks. What are some of the other state laws that your organization is currently working on? I mean, are there some other things that, for example, I know that you had done some stuff where people who committed a crime with a gun would then not be allowed to have a gun for 5 or 10 years or something akin to that.
Similar. So the biggest thing that the government could do, and on a statewide basis, the federal government could probably incentivize this. Is if you, Adam, and I'm not saying you will do this, but let's say you committed wire fraud. Okay. Have you by any chance committed wire fraud?
No, absolutely not. No, those are not my kind of crimes.
If you had committed wire fraud, Adam, as a felony, you would not be able to get a gun. But wire fraud is not really a precursor to violence, right?
Correct.
But if you commit a violent, what's a misdemeanor, that could, like domestic violence often gets knocked down to a misdemeanor. Right. That could be a precursor to violence with a gun. So 80% of gun owners support the idea that if you committed a violent misdemeanor, you should not be able to get a gun for 5 years, right?
Right.
Excuse me, that is for 80% of gun owners. That by itself would reduce gun violence by almost 20%.
Wow.
Homicides, not suicides, but homicides by almost 20%. That's the biggest thing. So whenever people talk about all these other ideas about gun violence, I say to them, here's an idea that reduces gun violence by 20% for homicides. And that is, so let's take assault weapons ban. Right?
Okay, let's go into that. Yeah.
Let's get into that. So you mentioned that it expired in 2004 from 1990. We have the head of the Brady campaign from that time who got that passed. It's on our advisory board.
Okay.
And so when you look at the polling, Washington Post poll a couple of months ago had supported an assault weapons ban at 49%. There's a more recent Fox News poll that had it like 60%, but it varies. It's not as popular as some people might think, but amongst gun owners, it's only supported by 34% of gun owners.
It's very,
Right. So then gun owners aren't going to support it. The Congress doesn't support it. I'm not sure that the courts would support it anymore, right? So you have all these issues. The other thing is I went to a congressional office, Adam, a few weeks ago, and I was talking to them, and they were talking about assault weapons ban. I said, well, how many deaths a year with a gun do you think are from an assault weapon? And they said 40%. The answer is 1%, right?
1%.
3% of homicides and 1% of all deaths. Because most of the deaths are suicides. No one's committing suicide with an assault weapon. That would
Of
be
course.
or,
Right.
So what do we? So if you're going to spend your time on an assault weapons ban, and I understand that a lot of people are, and I get why they're doing it. We'll tell you something that will reduce homicides by 19%. You're giving us something that will reduce it by 3%, right? So that's kind of the point that we make. This is supported by gun owners. This is not. And when you talk about gun owner support, gun owners really support doing things up until the point that the person can get the gun, except for red flag laws, which we also work on. So I think about 20 states now, I have to look, have red flag laws, but some states don't even know. Like the people in the state, even in California where you are, Adam, a lot of people don't even recognize that a red flag law exists. When they're used, they're actually pretty effective. They're effective at often suicides because a person is a danger to themselves or others. So these are some ways to reduce deaths: red flag laws, misdemeanor crime laws, violent misdemeanor laws, and state permitting.
Were you working with then Senator Biden when Bill Clinton got assault weapons enacted, or is that before your time?
I was with Biden in 2006, 7, and part of 2008, though I am very much in touch with them now.
Yeah, right. No, I only asked because it's sort of hard to believe that happened. But what's worth mentioning to the audience, I know you can weigh in on this because they always say, well, the Republicans won't do anything about guns. You know, when Bill Clinton lost Congress in 1994, and I'm a big Bill Clinton fan. I thought he was great. You know, part of that exodus, or I should say excommunication, and subsequent defeats of Democrats were Democrats in southern and western states, right, who were perceived as too weak on guns or not, or too strong on gun control. Meaning, you know, there've always been, or when the parties were a bit more regional, gun ownership was as prominent for a, you know, Alabama Democrat or a Utah Democrat or West Virginia Democrat as it was for maybe a conservative Republican elsewhere, you know. And now, would you say that, well, first of all, assault weapons ban seems so unlikely, if impossible, right? First off, is that right? It's unlikely. For now, would there be Democrats who would oppose an assault weapons ban? I mean, other than Joe Manchin, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right. So in the Senate, you need 60 votes in the Senate. Right. So you're not getting it.
No.
And you may be able to get 55. So it doesn't even, like, it's not just not happening, right? House, you have a Republican House now, so it's not happening. So, you know, there are a few Republicans who support those types of things. You had some Democrats like Ron Kind from Wisconsin who left last year, who were opposed to a lot of these things. A moderate Democrat in Wisconsin, a great guy, by the way. But it's very tough because you need the majority in the House, which you're not getting because it's a Republican House.
Right.
And then you need the 60 votes in the Senate, which, even though the Democrats have a slight edge in the Senate, you're not getting 60 votes, barring anything unforeseen. So a lot of the groundwork that you're laying, if that's what you're working on, would be for the future. I was with Senator Chris Murphy was here.
He's a great guy. Wow.
And I don't know him particularly well, not as well as you know him, obviously.
Well, meaning I don't know him, but I think the world of what he represents, I find him to be, I don't want to say Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but he's got that kind of little Jimmy Stewart appeal about it.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And he was comparing it to the civil rights movement in that it took, you know, many years, 15 years from beginning to getting the legislation passed. And his feeling was that the legislation that passed last year was a significant step. But I'm going to take you into a private meeting that we don't talk about very often, which is that I host a bi-monthly meeting of both sides of the gun issue. And I mean both sides. I'm talking about people who are on Twitter want to kill each other. And they come onto our Zoom. And what I usually do is have somebody, a professor or something, present some new research on gun issues. And then we get into a conversation. And then what happened was last year when Congress was considering the legislation, it's a small group, about 15 people. Somebody from that group said, let's have an emergency meeting of our group and see if there's anything we agree upon. So that happened. And then we are able to talk for an hour and find out that, for example, on mental health, in a mental health exam, we agree. and then we're able to present that to the Senate negotiators. They know I'm not presenting the names of the people who agree upon that, but I say to them, this is where both sides are, and you won't get a hard time if this is the kind of thing. Yeah, so it's left and right, and we get everybody together. And part of it, Adam, is this whole idea of like what you do, basically, which is that people can talk to each other.
Yeah.
And you don't have to scream at the person that you're talking to, and it's okay to disagree.
Right.
And which I think we've lost a lot of, and I'm sure that it's on your mind a lot too. We've lost a lot of that in this country. If you disagree with somebody, they're a horrible person. They're not, right? I know.
Yep.
And so we try to do a lot of that. And, listen, we had a conference, Adam, an annual conference, and we had, for example, on a panel, Fred Gutenberg, whose daughter died at Parkland, who's on TV a lot. Fred's a great guy. And Amy Swearer from the Heritage Foundation, and she testifies on Capitol Hill a lot. She's super smart. They couldn't disagree more on this issue. We put them together for about an hour, and it's not to say that there's some great kumbaya moments, but you find that people want to reduce deaths in this country, right? Right, that's the idea. And we may agree on some things, we may disagree on them. But let's start with the premise that we want to solve this problem and try to work from there. And so figuring out what the most divisive things to do, I understand that helps move the conversation on the left and the right. But it's really for us about figuring out those practical things to do. And that's why we do that.
Yeah. I mean, and in the, what I wanted to build on that by saying, I think that everything you do probably is so effective behind the scenes or as a result of those Zooms and so forth, because this from going on TV, but every single thing now gets reduced to, in our reductive, hyperpolarized media culture. I don't know this necessarily reflects America, but reflects the way we narrate, the way we tell the story, gets into a bad faith argument. Right. Oh, they're Republican. They want guns in school. My kids are dying and fuck them. Or they're, far left. They want to seize my gun and we shouldn't be able to protect ourselves. And my old mother is going to get murdered. It's, as we have to live in this climate. So I find it very, very difficult to hear good faith arguments really on any of the news channels, because they're just not, other cable news, they're not sober enough. There's a premise. You know what I mean? And there's an agenda. I can only imagine when you vouch for a gun owner among people in a certain group, how you must be viewed as, are you suspicious? Because I get, as a dirty moderate who votes blue because we're fighting against authoritarianism, not because I'm necessarily a Democrat, because I'm not, I'm viewed with suspicion by the left as to who am I really secretly a Ronald Reagan conservative and hiding, or, as if I'm a member of the SS Waffen or something.
It's very interesting because with cable news, it's designed for an argument, right?
Right, of course.
Like if I said to the average voter, how many gun owners do you think favor universal background checks? They're not going to say 84%.
No.
They're probably going to say, 35% or maybe
right.
That. But cable news is designed to have what they would say are both sides. So even if 84% of gun owners favor something, then they're looking for that 16% that does not.
Right.
Debate against the 97% of the country that does, which makes it seem like it's 50-50, but it isn't. Right. So, for example, just for my own mental health, Adam, I can't watch a lot of cable news.
No, me neither.
Way too, the idea is to fight and cause trouble all the time. And it's not just gun issues, Adam. And I think you're referring to that too, which is that people agree on a lot of issues.
Oh,
but
yeah.
The idea for some people is to create controversy all the time. And I think, I'm going to criticize some folks directly.
Sure.
But you've seen this, you saw that CNN article in the Atlantic the other day.
About Chris Licht, you mean? Yeah.
And it's fascinating because it shows you how wrong these things can go.
Oh, sure.
Cable networks. And listen, Adam, I've done almost every show on Fox, not in the last week.
Did. That's what I only did Fox. That's what I did.
Right. So I did too. Same as you. I follow you. What you do, I do.
Yeah.
And I was doing shows, and I would do a show. And then as I was done, the microphone comes off. The person starts talking about you in a mean way, and you can't respond because you've already walked off the set, right? Or whatever it is. So, so it's that stuff. I'm not a big fan. When I do those shows on BBC or CNN, they're news. right? We're not in a back and forth debate.
No.
We're talking about news. I always say I'm like the Grim Reaper coming on, because if I'm coming on, something terrible has just happened, right? So, but I'm getting into long conversation, an actual.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, yeah. I mean, because you're working in a multi-pronged way, obviously a sense of bereavement and such pain comes over the country every time you see this happen. And you're a father of teenage girls, right? Is that right?
I am indeed, Adam.
Yeah. And your kids are living, which is unbelievable to me. I can't imagine growing up like this, right? Where the gun drills and the gun lockdowns, and that's part of life, right? Where do I hide? And, I have a friend who has twins, fraternal twin boys, and they have to hide. They're told they have to hide in different places when in a case of a shooter. And you think about this and you go, we have to find a way to solve this without, that isn't confiscatory or unconstitutional. It doesn't have to be. But the fact that kids are living like that, and that the weapon of choice has been the AR-15, armor light rifle, or whatever.
I'm not going to say that's been the weapon of choice. I'm going to say that that's been used in some shootings, but the vast majority of shootings are not with an AR-15.
The vast majority of school shootings are not with AR-15?
Are with a handgun, not an AR-15.
Yeah.
But to further an example of what you're talking about, Adam, my kid is at the school, and a couple of weeks ago I was on a flight to DC, and she texts me and says, "There's a shooter at my school." Okay, I'm on the plane. I say, "Where are you?" She says, "I'm on the bus." I say, first, lead with the fact that you're on the bus, right? So, second, it turned out there was somebody like with a knife outside the school is what it was. But there's such an expectation now that that's happening. That's become such a issue as well, is that the kids expect this to be happening at their schools now.
Right. And your kids' generation, right? I mean, they must feel, we've got to have gun control, right? We got to have strict gun control. Obviously these are just your kids, but
the generation that's in the schools now, I live in a bubble. Right, I'm in Los Angeles. I lived in New York. I lived in DC. You lived in South Florida. I've never lived outside of the bubble.
Right.
So in those areas that we're in, the kids are. One of my concerns is the mental health of the kids who see all these problems that seem intractable. The gun thing is the biggest thing, which I think is motivating. Is going to be motivating a lot of voters next year. But there's also, there's a lot of doom about climate. There's doom about war in Europe. How do you keep these kids from being depressed when they hear about this stuff every day in their schools is an issue.
Yeah, no, it is. What, back to the assault weapon thing for a sec, or AR-15. Say that one more time. The majority, let me ask you a different way. What percentage, or do you know, of school shooting or mass shootings, not have to be school, but school or mass shootings, do they use it? You don't remember. Yeah.
I can only tell you that of the 26,000 Can you hear me, Adam?
Oh, there you are, Matt. There you are.
Yeah, I'm switching you over devices because I don't know what is going on.
Nope.
So sorry.
No problem.
Okay.
We usually have so many tech problems for other reasons.
I don't know what is happening.
No, not just you. We have them too. So we're just lamenting. I wish we could all be in a studio with engineers, but those days are over.
Right.
Right.
So let's do it this way, and this should be fine.
Okay, perfect. Much better. You weren't sure what percentage what percentage of mass shootings involve an AR-15,
I
but
could look it up.
but
But
you
it's 20,000 suicides, 26,000 suicides, 20,000 homicides. So of those homicides, of those 20,000, 3% in total are with an assault weapon. Now, I know the number has grown in the last couple of years, but of those 20,000, 3%, so it's about, if I'm adding that correctly, about 600 or so
right.
have been with an assault weapon.
I think one of the more disheartening things I've seen, and I think this is why your fight is so important, and I know you can combat it, but I think I recently read, it might be 12 or 13 states, they're all red states, sadly, have moved away from any appreciable gun safety legislation, to permitless carry and
Right.
all this stuff. And I mean, isn't that, um, I mean, the majority of gun owners can't be happy with that. Or maybe
So
they
I would
are.
agree. There's more legislation that's been passed in the last couple of years that allow guns in more places than what we would call gun control legislation in the state level. So you're right, and gun owners are not in favor of things like permitless carry, that sort of thing. There is no popular support for that. A lot of this, though, is like if you're watching the Republican candidates in the getting ready to run for president,
Sure.
they're going to the right on gun issues because that's where they find in the Republican Party there's a lot of the passion, and so you're seeing it go in some ways in the other direction. The other thing, Adam, which we haven't touched on yet, is that the courts have moved to the right against the will of the American people and are now using a test as to whether or not a law on guns would have been passed in the 17 or 1800s to determine whether or not it should be law now. So this is a very different sort of space that we're in. And people, I think, are not fully aware yet of the fact that it's very difficult to pass any laws right now that'll get through the courts. They're taking back a lot of this stuff. So in every state in the country, because that's what the Supreme Court has been deciding. In other words, on domestic violence wasn't against the law in the 17 or 1800s, right? So now the Fifth Circuit just said very recently, a few months ago, that a domestic violence order is not enough for somebody to have their gun taken away because it wasn't a law in the 17 or 1800s. People need to sort of understand what's going on there as well.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember, famously, it was always cited as, the individual right to own a handgun, the 2008 Heller case.
Correct.
But in that opinion, right, even conservative, or you argue super conservative jurist, the late Antonin Scalia, said that does not mean that no gun regulation or some kind of gun safety regulation is illegal, right? I mean, you know what I mean? And the word, just because you own a handgun doesn't mean that you have an unlimited right to own any gun at any time. It seems that last year's decision in New York, terms, the Supreme Court's decision, sort of not requiring a concealed carry permit. Was that the foundation of it?
The Bruin case you're referring to.
Bruin case, yeah. Seemed to open up, I mean, certainly Thomas and Alito's writings and their concurrences and what have you were so ridiculously utopian in a tragic way, that we know, we just don't need these. And it's always in some kind of infringement on your rights. And, and that's the rub of what I love about 97% is that gun owners and people who are sympathetic to guns and owning guns for very valid reasons, and people who know that we need to have gun reform come together and say, and I say this to my friend, I'm making a point with this, who's been teaching me about guns. He's an ex-military guy. I say, I don't want to use his name. I said, why is this right unlimited to you when you believe most other rights you believe in are not? Why can't you understand on the most simple level? And I'm a First Amendment absolutist, for example, that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's just what you can't do. I'm okay with that. I think there's been terrible, some legal and many cultural restrictions on speech in the last 10 years, which are horrible. I think we have to air out all the bad stuff. Constitutional right to hate speech. People don't like it. Too bad. We have to listen to this stuff. It's who we are. But why are they're allowed a minority of gun owners, or maybe it isn't a minority, who just see everything's a slippery slope argument. Yeah. Everything's a bad faith deal. Yeah. And any infringement on any gun of any kind suddenly makes them defenseless. It's just that to me is not that to me is the rub of, I think, what I call this kind of ideological sickness.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting because we've proven over and over again, and we're about to do it now, Adam. We just brought in Kristen Soltis Anderson, who's on CNN.
CNN, right? I remember her. She was a Democratic strategist, right? Republican strategist, right.
And Jeff Guerin, who's a Democrat, are now doing our new polling of gun owners that starts very soon and will be released in the fall or in September. We know where the vast majority of people are. But the thing that the people who want no changes are good at is making themselves heard. So what really needs to happen is that the vast majority needs to make itself heard in just as an effective way. And sometimes what happens, Adam, is people want so many things done that they don't get focused on the couple of things that are doable. So in other words, if I go into your office and I ask you for 25 things, 19 of which have no chance of being done, it's not that effective in terms of messaging. And I find there are lots of great people in this space, but I find that's the case often, is that there's too much that's being asked for, not enough that's realistic, not enough focus.
Yeah, and also, there are good faith arguments that gun ownership advocates have made, where they said, look, there are certain laws you can pass through the years that it's not. Yeah. You can pass these laws, but all you're doing is you're mucking up the court. You're not really stopping this gun violence. I remember in the 90s, and that's the other thing I want to ask you about the Brady bill.
Yeah.
I believe, was it a 5-day waiting period that Bill Clinton? I can't remember waiting.
For the waiting period that Bill Clinton passed, I won't know. I don't know.
Okay, but anyway, the Brady Bill's Gun Safety Act of 1993. Is that gone?
Yeah. So, they call it sunsetting.
Yeah.
In 2004, and that's prompted the purchasing of assault weapons, which were a small number back at that time, have now become a huge number. In other words, we talk about the fact that you can't get rid of 400 million guns in this country. You can't get rid of 40 million assault weapons either, people, right?
No, 10%. Yeah.
Right. So what are we going to do? The question is, what are we going to do? Right. So you can't get rid of the guns. It's just not happening. And people compare us to Australia. We're not Australia. Move on.
Yeah, so, I can't stand that argument either. Well, Jacinda, what's her name in New Zealand? I said, we're not New Zealand. Forget it. Serbia just confiscated. Okay, we're not doing that.
Right.
Right.
That's not happening. So
right.
What are you going to do? This is what we always say. What are you going to do?
Right.
Some people, listen, on the Republican side, we've been getting a lot of good meetings. Some people believe in some aspects of gun reform. Some are afraid to be the lead Republican on the issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And on the Democratic side, we've been having some good, realistic conversations and continue to do that with folks. But we try to say, you could talk about passing this, but it's not happening. What can we actually do here?
Right. I think your enemy also, it's, I shouldn't say enemy. The biggest challenge is no fault of your own, just like I face here on my own show, is that what goes viral? The far left person saying we're coming for your guns and now your kids are going to be safe, or the right wing person saying there is no world in which, you're not going to take these out of my cold dead hands, and that's what you see. And then those feed on each other, right, with a horrible, action reaction kind of way. And then that frames the debate where you have to go under the radar and get the work done.
So,
what you're doing. Yeah.
Because Joe Walsh,
who I love. I love Joe. Never Trump. He's a never Trumper like me. Yeah,
exactly. So he took me around to meet with some Republican officers. I don't think everybody on the Republican side is going to meet with Joe Walsh anymore now that he's
they're mad at him. I know, because he's got a conscience. I love him.
Right. So he talks about the fact that he's a take the gun out of my cold dead guy with guns, but that doesn't mean that he doesn't favor some basic things like background checks and red flag laws. In other words, he wants to buy the gun he wants to buy. We got it, right? But if Joe Walsh was a criminal who had a history of violent crime, perhaps it's not the best idea. And so, he's in favor of that. When we go around to these offices in DC, we had in Michigan, we brought Olivia Troy, who ran national security for Mike Pence.
Mike Pence, right? I remember her. Yeah.
She testified in Michigan because this is amazing, Adam.
Wow.
Her aunt in New Mexico, there was that Walmart shooting a few years ago over 20 people. and her aunt was in that Walmart and got pulled to safety by a stranger, right? So now that's in New Mexico about 3 years ago. Now, a couple of months ago, there's a shooting in a mall in New Mexico near that Walmart. Few people were killed. And again, her aunt got pulled to safety by a stranger 3 years in the same town. So Olivia, has spoken for us. She's amazing. She's spoken for us in Michigan and in other places as well. And Olivia is a Republican. She's
Oh yeah,
never Trumper, but she's a Republican who worked for Mike Pence.
right.
He feels very strongly that we need some basic gun laws. They sound, to some people, they're controversial, but in terms of their popularity, they're not.
Right. So the political slogan is vote like your aunt who nearly got shot twice. They say like vote like, please don't vote against my humanity. You know what I mean? Right. No, but interestingly, and this is our politics always been this way. It's a sad state of affairs that I'm glad Olivia's there, but you can watch unnecessary gun violence. It has no effect on you and it should still hit home, but listen, whatever it takes. Right? Whatever.
Everybody now, Adam, because even like we went to see the Spider-Verse movie last night.
How is it?
It's very good.
I love that first one. That was great. Yeah.
It's good. You should go see it. But you're sitting there and you're looking at the people who walk up and down the aisle and you're looking to see where the exit is. And
of course,
talk to people who have not been victims of gun violence and they'll say they don't even go to the supermarket anymore after what happened in Buffalo, or they don't go to the mall, or they won't let their kids go to the mall. And I think everybody is being very affected by this. And I think what you might see next year is that Republican women are starting to talk about it as the biggest issue for them.
Okay. So I was going to say let's talk about 2024. I think this is going to be the biggest election of our lifetime. And we've heard that every election cycle now for 20 years, but it actually, because the Senate map is so unfavorable to Democrats, the Democrats look like they could win the House back. I really, 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 I voted for Joe Biden and I'm voting for him again. There's no question I'm voting for him. But I do have legitimate concerns that his reelect is a cakewalk. I'm not so sure.
Well, no one is saying that. Let me just.
Well, the fundamentals favor. Listen, the fundamentals. There are enough people in this country. Okay, I'm not one of them. Okay, because this isn't. If you told me you were having Chris Sununu or Phil Scott or Larry Hogan, yeah, maybe. But we don't have those options. Maybe I say. Right. There are enough people who are willing to give a Republican president a chance. Will it be Trump? I don't know, but there are just enough people who are dissatisfied. However, what I believe though is the Republican attack on democracy is so extreme, the abortion stuff is so extreme. Would you say that what I call the Lincoln Project vote, this sort of women for gun reform now is part of the suburban moderate, the old McCain-Romney vote, is probably going to go blue the way I'm going to go blue because these social issues are so out of control?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm not objective because I worked for Biden in the past.
I like Joe. I've always liked him. I'm not saying just because I'm voting for him. I just,
no. I'm just saying that I might be more inclined to speak favorably, but I am super impressed by some of the things that have been able to be done, especially after the last 4 years.
Oh, yeah.
I find myself, I'm on the moderate to liberal side.
Yeah.
So and I always say, I don't know everything. You don't, maybe
No.
You're a super smart guy, but I don't.
Oh, no, I don't. I'm just suggesting that I don't, it's very, as you know, politics is like a day in politics, is like a light year, as I was taught a lot. So we don't know, I don't, I see a Ron DeSantis, for example, as inept, vengeful, petty, and small. I don't know, though, if he ends up being the nominee. I don't think he will be, but if he ends up being the nominee at 44 years old next to an older Joe Biden, he could be appealing. I don't know.
I totally agree. And so what I mean by that is what I'm saying is that I don't know that I'm right on every issue, right? Like, I don't know. And, even though I consider myself a moderate to liberal Democrat, I could be wrong on some of the things. So I want to hear from other people. And when it comes to the campaign, listen, there's no doubt Joe Biden is not 45 years old or 44 years old. He's not a young guy. He's got to run on his track record of how this government has worked and how it can work again. Those social issues that you're talking about, the Republicans are fighting on trans issues and book bans and things like that. I can't. these things are things where I am, Adam, that never come up, right? Does
Of
anybody
course.
you talking about, talking about book banning or
No.
any of this stuff? So, what people care about are, could they have a job? Does that job pay well? Are they
Correct.
going to be safe, right? Is
Correct.
it in their neighborhood?
Yep.
These are the things. So if I'm the Biden campaign, this is what I do, Adam. This is free advice, Adam. How much do you think I should charge for this? A lot.
I think you should charge them a lot. He's your ex-boss. And here's the thing. Democracy's on the line. We got to get him reelected. So
That's right.
Yeah.
So Wall Street Journal did an article a couple of months ago about the rise of manufacturing in the United States. And it was basically like a campaign ad, because it was all about how this administration has increased manufacturing in the United States and good jobs in the United States. And then you had, after the shooting in Tennessee a few weeks ago, the congressman from Nashville,
Yeah.
the Republican congressman, came out and said, there's nothing we could do, and I'm going to homeschool my kids. Right? And that's it. I would just put those two things up against each other in an ad every day for a year and a half. And that's all you need to say. I mean, Joe Biden's old, but I would say, Joe Biden's old, but if he was 300 years old with his track record, I wouldn't care.
I know.
He's a very effective job.
Very.
United States, and there's no drama. We don't have daily drama, and who needs that?
Who needs it? Well, and I think the interesting thing, and this is like a Washington, this is a bureaucratic problem. It's a big government. I don't mean it in a like I'm not trying to cast aspersions or sound ideological. I said that the way we run our government, the debt ceiling crazy. We don't need a debt ceiling. It's not constitutional. It's nothing in the kind. We don't need this. We pass law. Joe Biden passes that great infrastructure bill, the semiconductor bill, good thing. As you know, a lot of times you don't see the results of these for 5 years. That's the way the money gets allocated. So there's always, we're up against the reality of politics in a 24-hour political cycle. But legislation is what legislation does, and these things take time. So a lot of the achievements, which aren't quote unquote sexy, are terrific investments in America.
Yeah.
And you have the White House's ear, I take it, right, to some extent, ish.
I would privately, I might say to some extent. Publicly on your podcast, I wouldn't say that.
Okay, well that's fine. But I'm saying something for you, because I will tell you, I marveled at this, because when Barack Obama was heading into re-election, I was very concerned, because remember, the economy really hadn't recovered quite the way out of he says he did stave off a depression, but that's different when people still feel jobless. No different than inflation is down, but eggs are still up and things matter. You can't go into someone and say, hey, well, it used to be 9%. Now if people are still feeling the pinch. Yeah. So the Democrats have to get in touch with that. But when Barack Obama ran, he just turned Mitt Romney, who I actually rather like, but I voted for Barack, into a plutocrat. He said he took all your Bain Capital jobs. He blew you guys out of the water. He said he's just going to just rape the country and pillage it, boom, boom, boom. And he rode that bread and butter message to re-election. To your point about manufacturing, I would hope that Biden would do that. But the ace in the hole is guns, abortion, book banning, things that the voters have left the Republican Party in droves over, because this has become the monster devoured its creator. And again, I've had talks with I've never been a Republican, but it's like, you guys did this for years. You promised the pro-life, you promised the crazy, I'm not saying everything led to Trump. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I do think there are people who demagogue things and said, oh, don't worry about it, we're going to cut your taxes. But there's a point where, right, you fed them enough. The plant, Little Shop of Horrors, the plant eats you. Right. You gave Audrey too a lot of blood. At some point, your flower shop's destroyed. The vines are stroking you, and you're eaten alive. It's true.
Yeah, no, it's been amazing what's happened over the last few years. We yearn for the days when it was a fight over lower taxes.
Oh, it's great.
Right now, it seems like.
By the way, how about limited government? I actually am. I believe government has an important role to play. Where I'm not a Democrat, I don't have a utopian view of government being able to really transform your life. I think it's an important safety net. And I also think human nature is too rotten to socially engineer it, but that's another debate. But as a guy who believes that government should be smaller, the last thing people like me believe is that government, right, as we're trying to fight for it to be shrunk economically, should be this unlimited weaponized force against your enemies, right? Banning books and trans kids. I mean, this is like every single thing you guys are not supposed to be about, you now are about.
Well,
And that's outrageous.
Yeah, when we talk to Democrats on messaging, it's about freedom, right? Like now the Republicans have become the anti-freedom party.
Absolutely.
So it's becoming Cuba. Like, how is this really happening? And you have to run on that and let the people know. Do you know a guy named Simon Rosenberg, Adam?
Oh, sure. He's a progressive, but he does all the polling, right?
Yeah. He shows polling. I thought he was a pollster too, but he's more of a.
He got it right in 2022.
Exactly. So
sure.
With
New Democratic Network, not New Democrat, something like that.
I've had a bunch of conversations with him lately.
Yeah.
And he provides all this, and they're factual information.
I know.
About the economy booming under Democrats and deficits lowering under Democrats and all
Absolutely.
Stuff. And he's right. And
yes.
What I would say, the other thing I would say though to people when they're voting is, you talked about Bill Clinton. And I think one of the things that people really liked about Bill Clinton was that he seemed like he was trying. That if there was a problem, he was up until 2 a.m. trying to solve it, which did not that he was getting everything right.
No.
Right. And that he was trying. And I'll give you a worse example, which was Rudy Giuliani when he was mayor of New York.
I voted for him.
Too. So Rudy Giuliani, New York was in the crapper when Rudy Giuliani, people thought it wasn't coming back. Rudy Giuliani and Bill Bratton, they tried. It didn't mean everything worked.
No.
But they tried. You got the idea that if any crime, this is in Rudy's first term before, Rudy started to go to the deep end.
Yeah.
But you got the idea that if there was a crime, Rudy was showing up. Right? Right. And so when you think about who you want to be president, the question that I would think you need to ask yourself is, who's actually trying to solve the problems that the country has? Think about that.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. I mean, listen, it's very difficult. Lindsey Graham is on tape saying it, and he doesn't like to see it. But if you don't like Joe Biden as a person, if you don't think he's a decent guy, and you work for him, maybe, if
Adam, I've had a lot of crazy speech writing experiences.
No.
Joe Biden was, I really, and one of the great.
You could tell he's a real guy.
Yeah, one of the great things about working for him, though, was that the people around him were all super nice. Like even family members, everybody was.
Yeah.
And I'm not part of the inner Biden family.
No. I understand.
But these are, the people were just so. That's what impressed me. I've worked for some good speechwriting folks when I was a speechwriter, and some really horrible ones. He was one of the good ones.
Listen, I in 2020, I told people, because I used to be a registered Democrat, I just prefer to be an independent. I was a very, frustrated Democrat. So I said, it's best for me to be independent. But of course I backed him. But at the start of 2020, I said to everybody after the goddamn tragedy, after the apocalypse of 2016, I said, the only guy up there who can win is Joe Biden. And I said, let me tell you something. You better get behind this guy. That's it. Party's over. And this is when he hadn't even been in the I said, he's the only one.
Yeah.
I said, and then shortly thereafter, Jonathan Capehart.
Of course.
Right?
I used to do Chris Matthews on occasion with Jonathan.
Oh, and Chris is a good friend of mine, actually. We've known each other for a lot of years. I love Chris.
He didn't remember me from one time I was on the show to the next time, so I doubt he'd remember me now.
No, I mean, but Capehart then ran a piece right after Biden got the nomination about his viability, and he called her. He has an Aunt Gloria, an older black woman, lives in North Carolina, and he wrote the thing. And Aunt Gloria said, "What?" And he said, "Aunt Gloria, why Biden? Why are you and so many in the black community and elsewhere voting for Joe Biden?" I said, "He's going to take an old white guy to beat an old white guy." In other words, the pragmatism of. But I knew Joe, and I was like, God, I wish he'd run in 2016. But the point being is now he's the president. Very unserious challengers, obviously. Not that he should. Yeah. These are very unserious people. But the Republican side is going to be fascinating. And we'll see. But just to jump back,
entertainment working group that works on lots of different causes and political stuff at a very high level of actors, writers, and producers. Somebody said there were more Academy Award winners on our Zooms than at the. So that group gets very involved in lots of different types of things. And when you say we'll see, what I would also say to people, because they're going to have a lot of anxiety over the next year and a half, the November election, is that the best thing for you to do is not watch TV all the time, but do something. There are times it doesn't cost anything. You can knock on doors.
Sure.
right? That will make you feel as if you have some sense of control and everything isn't spiraling around you. And it may be in your district or it may be out of your state if you can go out of your state. Things like that. Now, obviously, campaigns need money, that sort of stuff. But the number one thing you could do is get involved, not just screaming at the television or that sort of thing.
No.
Get involved, and if you get involved, you may make it through this.
I was going to say, and this segues back and helps close us out. You talked about, you can get laws passed or legislation passed, and it's not going to solve every single problem, but it's going right. And I always said this. I say this to my gun owner friends who were like, "Well, we want to stop these killings, but I don't. This is going to lead to." I said, "No. Even Columbine happened during the assault weapons ban, but the bottom line is the stuff you're doing, law by law by law, and this goes for anything in our debate." Yep. I care. We at Dirty Moderate created democracy first, country first, and we've lost that. And my whole thing is anything. People say, well, Joe Biden did this, but I don't like this. I like that. I said, it doesn't. Why do you have to like every single thing the president does? Do you know how much stuff I didn't like, especially the second term Barack Obama did? It didn't matter. I still liked a lot of what he did, and I thought he was wrong. And this is the problem is that,
this is what I say, Adam, to people. Yeah. The number one thing is what you're talking about, which is democracy, basically. Yeah. And that's what the country is founded on. Without that, we have nothing.
Right.
So what I say is when George Washington was crossing the Delaware, I turned around in the boat to ask people where they were on tax cuts. The war.
Well, and you know what? And to jump off that, Washington didn't lead a young, nascent group of colonists against Britain thinking, well, we're not going to have any casualties. We're not going to get independence from a mad king across the pond because we are going to lose lives. No, I mean, there are costs to everything and there are imperfections. And I think accepting those imperfections it's very hard in a politics that promises the fantasy of, if this doesn't happen today, it's bad, or perfection, which doesn't exist, and that's been harmful. It's always harder, I argue, for the Democrats, because the Democrats don't offer, screw that, get a job, you're poor. Oh, yep, you had enough of that. Pride's ruining our kids. I fuck them. No, Democrats are like, well, let's break down the information and you work off data. And I think with an emotional issue like guns, some people on the left too don't want to hear it because they're just mad at anyone owns a gun. And you're saying, look, we can make this a better situation and still protect our Second Amendment. And this is doable, but you're going to have to, dial down the temperature.
You have to give to get in any negotiation, so you don't get everything that's perfect. But the idea is, how do you lower the number of gun deaths? Like if you're working, Adam, you live in Burbank, in Los Angeles. Homelessness is a big issue in Los Angeles, right? Yeah. You're not lowering the number of homeless people to zero. How do you get more housed? And all these, like, let's say your big thing is electric cars. How do you get people? You're not changing everything overnight, but you have to work toward doing that. There's no perfect answer. Let's do those that work.
That's right. And so before you go, here's the big question. What can our listeners do to help support 97%?
Thank you for asking. Well, I think first you can go to our website, 97%, and take a look at it there. Follow us on social. But the biggest thing people can start to do is have this conversation with people. Understand because people don't agree with you, it doesn't mean that they're bad people. Understand that most people are really in a similar, if not the same place. And then I would say the number one thing that anybody could do, Adam, is advocate. We have our policy roadmap. It's up on the website, and I've explained it to you about the violent misdemeanor laws and that sort of thing. Advocate. And a lot of people say advocate with your congressman, but sometimes don't, because your congressman may already be there. Try to advocate maybe with some others who aren't there if you can. The best things you could do.
And lastly, do you feel like this particular issue, I should have asked you this at the beginning, it's a good way to close out. What made you do it? Why is this why is 97% so important? 97% so important.
Question. It's the philanthropists that brought me in. Weren't victims of any gun violence either. I think it's the whole, when you think about what's going on a daily basis, it almost seems like it's a matter of time, right? So what can we do to make people safer? And, it's taking a look at it. Maybe there was nothing, Adam, as I said before, maybe there was nothing we could do. But we found out that there was an area that wasn't being covered, and there was something, and as a 15 and 13-year-old kids, and I think about what they're going through mentally, because now one of my kids has armed guards at her school, which didn't exist there until about a month ago, outside of the classrooms, right? And this has become a super frightening thing for them, and the idea that they have to go through this on a daily basis to be worried about this, it's just unbelievable.
No, it really is. Well, you know what? Like you said, you're not right on every issue. Neither am I. Literally the tagline for the podcast is often, "What if I'm wrong?" Because I might be. And you know what, though? You know what? I learned this a long time ago in philosophy. The question is more important than the answer, and that's what we have to remember. And that's what you're doing. You're asking the questions and trying to figure it out, like we all are. And anyway, your work is priceless, and I have followed you for a long time. I'm so glad you joined us and came on this program. You're welcome anytime. And keep up the amazing work. Folks, Matthew Littman, 97%. Make sure you go to his website and follow him, read the roadmap, and get involved with this or any other issue. It is democracy first here at the show. As always, thank you for listening. Stay dirty, stay moderate. And, also go to vote.org and stay safe.
Thanks, Adam.
You can stick around if you want.